Hello, and welcome to another episode of Cult Classic Movie Corner, back on a regular Thursday. I would like to start the show by saying a grand hello and welcome to my guest, Mmmm.
Hello.
Hello. So glad you could join me. How are you today?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a complete pleasure and a great honor. So let's we've advertised the show about what movie we're gonna be discussing, but I guess it's a good way to start a show by saying what the hell we're doing here, and we are here today to talk about David Lynch's Dune from 1984. It seems kind of appropriate talking about this movie at the Cult Classic Movie Corner at a time like this when Denis Villeneuve's Dune has been released already over in Europe, amongst others in my country, Norway. And it's going to be released in the other parts of the world, amongst them the US, a little into October. Are you looking forward to seeing the new movie?
Oh, yes, Terje. I can't wait to see the new version. Yes.
And tell me, when do you remember when you saw David Lynch's movie for the first time?
Yes. I don't believe I saw it in a movie theater. I saw it on VHS sometime in the 80s, probably the 1987 or 1988.
Okay. Well, watching a cult classic on VHS is, by many, the preferred method. I'm going to have to be honest and say that I saw the movie for the first time. When was it? I saw Dune on last Thursday. So I saw this one on the following day, on Friday. So I saw it just the first time I saw this movie was just about a week ago. Yeah, for some reason, the Dune universe has just kept escaping me, and I think it's strange because I'm a great lover of science fiction. I love fantasy. I love grandiose movies. I like David Lynch, but I think I've heard so many bad things about this movie that it's been kind of hard to pick it up and just say that, okay, now I'm gonna watch this movie that came out in 1984 and see what it's all about. I said something about this on my last show, that sometimes watching these movies that get panned or do poorly at the box office and many people just like really shit all over them, it's kind of hard sometimes to decide that now I'm gonna pick up this movie and give it a chance. And the Dune movie is just one of those things. But now with the new movie coming, so many people in the online communities of like geekdom is so excited for it. And I thought, now is the time for me to pop my sand cherry. So
Perfect
I did.
Timing.
It was perfect timing. So I watched, as I said, I watched the new one last week. I'm not going to go really into that much. I might mention it a couple of times during this movie, just as small comparisons. But mainly we'll be talking about David Lynch's movie. So in short, what do you think of it? And maybe also, have you read the books? I have not.
Well, I haven't read the books. I listened to the audiobooks, and I haven't finished listening to the entire first audio version of the first book. But what I can say is, after seeing the film and then watching it, repeatedly over the years, and even so recently as a week or so ago, I love David Lynch's version of Dune.
Yeah, my initial reactions were also very positive, and I think I'm going to go there and say that between the new one and this one, I actually do prefer David Lynch's movie.
Wow! Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness!
There's many things that makes me kind of. It's a more fulfilling movie experience in some ways, but in others, it's not. Um, David Lynch's movie uses about one. I kept watching the timer on my DVD player or my Blu-ray player, and it uses about 1 hour and 20 minutes to come to the same point as in Denis Villeneuve's movie. And while I think maybe Denis Villeneuve's movie really does do the exposure better, it uses more time telling the story. Sometimes it takes a little too much time. And on the other side, David Lynch's movie, I think it's really great up until the point where he meets the Fremen, and they kind of take him under his wing. And then I'm talking, of course, of Paul Atreides. At that point, I think the movie kind of falls a little bit from like the first two halves, because it seems like they're using a lot of time telling the story up till then, and then they try to cram too much story and too much events and too much information into like the last little hour. But I did hear that this movie was, the original rough cut was somewhere between 3.5 and 4 hours. And we were talking a little bit backstage, and you said you'd seen a couple of other versions of this movie.
Yes, and for all practical purposes, if talking about the David Lynch version and then this new version that's come out recently, the David Lynch version is just really a hard act to follow, isn't it? Considering how much how much was managed to jam pack into this film, but even the configuration of this film has a little bit of controversy in it, because from what I understand, David Lynch didn't get sort of like the final cut decision on a lot of it. Mm-hmm. And so while a good portion of it was his vision, there were some other things that were either added or taken out that I'm guessing perhaps he would have preferred to have, in there. And so despite any kind of controversy associated with David Lynch's film, the film in itself is a masterpiece. There's no doubt about it. Just even the attempt of trying to recreate this incredible world that Herbert has created into a film is a feat in itself. And I don't know how any budget can exist to even do this. I would say it would probably take $1 billion to pull this thing off. And maybe it did. But I also think that there were a lot of things that he couldn't fit in. You mentioned the Fremen, and they kind of pop up, suddenly in the film. And one thing that I noted when I went to see, I saw a preview of, I've seen a preview of the new film, but even more importantly, in the trailers that we're seeing for the newer version, we actually hear the Fremen kind of speaking independently away from Paul and Jessica, So it's almost like they have a voice now that we couldn't tell from the Lynch film, and that's okay. Lynch packed in so much into this film that you can look at it and watch it 100 times and still find something that's very interesting, or something that can leave you speculate about. So I think, it's a success in that regard.
Yeah, and I really like what Lynch did with the world building. Of course, he didn't do all the work, but of course he's the director. But they did so many good things. One of the things I really like is that you can tell from like the props to the costumes which planet or which kind of clan the different things are from. They're very different from each other, and something. This is a science fiction movie, but it's also like a political space opera. And the thing I noticed mostly, I think, is that a lot of the movie doesn't feel like a science fiction movie. It feels very down to earth. There's like references to like Earth architecture. The costumes aren't like totally out there. Of course, you have like the Harkonnens with the Baron floating around. He has a strange suit on. There's like spaceships and stuff, but it doesn't feel polished. It doesn't feel like this vision that's supposed to be very alien to us as an audience. And it seems like they put a lot of work into creating this world we're seeing. And for me, that's one of the things that I came out of thinking that David Lynch's movie pulled off better than Denis Villeneuve's movie. It's amazingly gorgeous, but it felt smaller. Which is a strange thing for like such a grandiose movie, and many people will probably say I'm crazy for saying so, but this is just my feeling coming out of having seen both these movies in the procession of like under 24 hours.
Yeah, and I have to give you some credit for that, because my head would be spinning if I had, just personally, if the first time that I saw Dune 1984's version and then had to watch an additional version on top of that, I have to give you credit, Terje. You're a real trooper for doing that. So I have to agree with you on all those points. And what's also kind of interesting, and first of all, there's so much to talk about with this film, and I don't know how much time we have, but I'm just so excited to even be talking about David Lynch's Dune, because of course it's a cult classic. This film would have been a cult classic I think it would have been impossible for it not to become a cult classic, because it's so beautifully made. And so even if you're watching it and, maybe you're, let's say for a person is watching it, they're not a fan of Dune, they'll watch it and they're like, yeah, that's kind of interesting. That's different. Like it's not a boring film whatsoever.
No.
And I don't know whether this is entirely true, because I don't know every single detail about the Dune universe, but a lot of the characters and a lot of the houses, like the House of the Harkonnens, who are just like these badass, tough as nails group that they just like never say die, these guys. So while you want to hate them, you're kind of like, like they're just so badass, and they were lucky to get Sting playing Fade in this. And at the time in the 80s, Terje, and you remember, like that was like a big deal. Like Sting was a huge star, and coming off of, he might have still even been part of the Police, but it was a big deal.
I think so.
Yeah, it was kind of like, or maybe they had just released Synchronicity. I can't remember exactly, but coming off of that and having like, being part of this band, it was just like this really cool thing to have this rock star, this 80s rock star in a movie. And so going even further to say that what's so unique about this universe for me is that a lot of them are, they're humanoid. Many of them are humanoid, but even the characters that don't appear to be humanoid, like the Spacing Guild, they are actually humanoids. It's just that they've been mutated into another form. And it's like, it's so cool to even think about this, because we've been seeing a lot of science fiction films. And of course, this book has inspired so many films, aside from being made into a film, but we're seeing a lot of science fiction where we're seeing, humans evolve and what happens when all these different things happen. But the families seem very tight in a sense, because they've been relying on the Spacing Guild to go back and forth, but they all want that power. And so I just think it's like so cool that kind of dynamic that you have in this particular story. And I think David Lynch, that version accomplishes it so nicely.
Yeah, and the scene where the representative from the Spacing Guild comes to see the Emperor, you can really tell that this is a big deal, because he kind of seems like he's shrinking in his shoes, being confronted by this representative from the Space Guild, and that's probably one of my favorite scenes, because I thought it was so well done. The whole of them trolleying this giant space tub in there, and like the slow reveal of the doors, and this creature that kind of swims towards the glass. It kind of gave me a modern Doctor Who vibe, actually, which is a series I really like, and I just thought it was really well made. Which is kind of the feeling I have in a whole of this movie, that it's really well planned, well thought out, and really well made. It's from 1984, but I think the special effects are good. I think like the sets are amazing. The costumes are grandiose. All in all, it feels like a really, really big production. And I checked it out, and it had a budget of estimated like $40 million. Wow. And it made only about $6 million in the box office, sadly.
Yeah.
There might be many reasons for this. I don't think Universal kind of had their back enough promoting the movie. They were taking this chance with a young actor. David Lynch had just gotten off of The Elephant Man, which is kind of the reason he got this movie, because that movie did so well. There's this whole story about the fact that David Lynch turned down directing the third Star Wars movie to do this. And David Lynch was young at that time. He isn't the star he is today, but I think it's sad, the fact that his experience working with a huge studio like Universal was so bad for him that he vowed after Dune to never ever again work with a big studio where he didn't have full control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You make such a good point with that. And of course, you're a director, you want to make films, and, you're excited about something. And I'm sure that there are, unfortunately, a lot of situations where you get into a situation where you're signing a contract and there might be something in the contract that says the final cut is not yours. And I think that for a lot of people, that would be like a deal breaker. And I also think that, if we're looking at this film as representing the Dune universe, I think another thing that it succeeds at, and you kind of alluded to this, is that this spice that they're mining on Dune, of course, this is a spoiler a version of this movie that we're reviewing. Of course.
If you haven't seen the movie, you're at the wrong place.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it does allow the Spacing Guild to do space travel, but something else that you and I have spoken about before, Terje, in a sort of like in a different context, is that it increases consciousness. And this is something that everybody wants. It prolongs your life. It increases your consciousness. So now all of a sudden, you're not just able to sort of like do simple mathematical calculations. You are now a strategist. You can now go ahead and figure out everything that's going on around you and utilize your brain in ways that you couldn't before. This is sort of this wonder drug that the entire universe is looking for, and rightfully so, because it is so spectacular. And the thing that's so, feels conflicting and feels confusing in a sense is, why is it that the Fremen are not in charge of their own planet, so to speak? This is like something that I think that most people might think about. And then I think that the realization that most of us make, or at least I made at the end of the film, is that the Fremen have different ideals. And sometimes, different things are important to different people, and I think that may be part of the issue. But if just trying to convey a different level of consciousness, from this spice and what it means prolonging your life. The people that we're looking at in some of these stories, or in some of the scenes, may be hundreds of years old. Like it's such a unique and unusual point of view in our lifetimes, which, for most of us is 70, 80 years old, if we are lucky. The idea of having that prolonged indefinitely is really just seems like it belongs in this incredible world that David Lynch created in the film.
And in the movie, they're kind of portrayed as kind of a hybrid between a slave race and basically terrorists, which are they're kind of fighting against these people who come into their world, their planet, and they control it because they have a resource that someone else wants. And this has always been relevant in any part of human history. So it's easy to kind of get into that storytelling. But I think you make a really interesting point about the fact that if you see how the movie turns out, they've kind of just been waiting for this savior to come and be their spearhead, to kind of finally go towards what they think is the right thing. And I don't know the story, how it evolves after this movie and the next books. So I think the next logical thing for me would be to get a hold of the two miniseries that ran on, I believe it was the Sci-Fi Channel, with a lot of cool actors there as well. And I'm interesting to see that even longer kind of version of the story. And now that I've had my attention sparked of the Dune universe, I think also I'll need to check out the audiobooks. I'm shamefully bad at reading books, so that's just not going to happen.
Well, you know something, I think you have to give yourself a bit of a break, because we all have busy lives, and there's some wonderful audiobook versions out there that are available. And, you know, for me, it's just even reading print anymore is not as enjoyable as it used to be. So, you know, I might shy away from looking at that. And when I read on my phone, I use big print anyway, but, you know, there's nothing wrong with audiobooks. Enjoy them. Sometimes they have music in the background, Terje. And, you know, the other thing that I was going to mention that's kind of important, although it's not necessarily, I'm not going to say it isn't focused on, but I think that, you know, paying attention to the depth of the story in David Lynch's version is, it's not entirely apparent, but the Spacing Guild and the Bene Gesserits are kind of, you know, they're behind the scenes, but they have a huge influence over everyone else. For example, you mentioned the Fremen, and, you know, on their world, you know, they're kind of waiting for this Messiah. And the reason why they're waiting for this Messiah, I believe, is because the Bene Gesserit leader that they have is kind of informed them that, you know, this is, you know, kind of guiding them in this direction. And so, you know, we kind of find out there's a Bene Gesserit woman there. The Bene Gesserit women are everywhere. And, you know, they are very similar in the sense to the Spacing Guild, in the sense that they're not ever really in charge, but they're right at a point or at an area where they have the ear of the person who's in charge. So they have influence. And that influence means that they're everywhere. They hear everything. We see in the beginning of the film where one of the Bene Gesserit women is there. But even when she's asked to leave the room, you know, she's kind of like,
Yeah, she's still listening. Yeah.
And so, and it was very similar to what we saw. I think that the Spacing Guild knows that she's listening, but they did that just to convince the king, you know, the Padishah leader, that emperor, that she wasn't listening, but she hears it all, and they know that as well. So it, you know, their connection for me is the spice, but apparently they were kind of two groups that were similar, and they kind of split. But they don't necessarily ever want to be the ones in charge, because that position can change over time. And that's what we witness in the film, actually.
Yeah, it is truly a gigantic space opera. There's it isn't like, it's not an action movie. It's a grand idea, and they're telling something very, very big. And I think this is probably one of those books that many would say isn't even possible to make into a movie that kind of delivers on what the book does. And I think that's the story for very many books. But there are certain books that will maybe never translate into a perfect movie from being a perfect book. I saw someone speak about Frank Herbert's Dune being one of those books, alongside Moby Dick and other examples.
I think another example would be Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, which they've made into a musical and plays and everything. But I've read that book, and Victor Hugo is one of my favorite authors. And you can't put that book into, it doesn't really, the passion that's in the book doesn't come out in the movie, as far as I'm concerned.
There's something about creating your own worlds in your head. I have read books, even though I'm not good at it. I know what it means to read a book. I've been through school. I have a couple of clips. I think I'm gonna do a clip now. It's a little long-winded. It's about 2 minutes, but it refers to the critical reception this movie got. And this clip is Siskel and Ebert talking about some of the worst movies of 1984, and Dune was one of those movies. So let's roll that.
When the word gets out about this picture, there won't be anybody in the first 30 rows of the theater. Coming up next at the movies, our choice for the worst big picture of the year. Roger and I each saw this year We agree that the biggest disappointment of the year is Dune, with a huge budget, a talented young director, and a script based on a highly regarded science fiction novel. This whole film looked ugly, as if the lens were filthy, telling the story of a young prince's attempt to bring peace to the universe by conquering bad guys and conquering bad giant worms that threaten to eat everything and everyone. Wow, that's boring. I've had more fun with sand at the beach. I think it's impossible for anyone who hasn't read the Dune books to follow what's going on in this story, which is needlessly complicated. And then there is a whole layer of ugliness throughout the picture, a guy with boils all over his face, the ripping open of people's chests, a premature birth of a baby in blood. Why all of that garbage? Dune is an unintelligible, gross...
One of the sad things about this picture is that it doesn't give you any entertainment, even on the level of looking at the special effects and the wonderful things happening on the screen.
They're quite cheap, actually.
They're not that. There are scenes that look like those high school pictures you see where some kid has a plastic airplane going across in front of his mother's bedspread, and you're thinking, this cost $45 million?
Yeah.
We ought to be able to see more windows on those spaceships.
There's a thing where he's riding a giant worm, like a surfboard or something, and I was laughing at it because it was quite amateur.
Well, the worm is supposed to be going like this, and I had the feeling the camera was going like this.
Yeah, also
Captain Video.
Every outer space shot is like outer space from Captain Video old TV shows. Not very exciting.
The only thing you could possibly do with this movie maybe would be use it as a talk-back movie later on when it gets to the campus circuit.
Right.
In 16 millimeter.
Hoot at it.
Yeah, you can sit there and wait for the one-liners and then go. It could make, in fact, a kind of a real long version of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. People could come to the theater with sand and worms. That would be lots of fun. I recommend that.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, they made some good points, didn't they? And I think that at the time in the 80s, there were great expectations for effects, and whether they were physical or, of course, CGI, was limited. It's not the level of perfection that we would expect now. In fact, we didn't even have the level of resolution we have now. So, there was a lot of great expectations in this. And I think that they used every trick under the sun to achieve their goals. But there are some, unfortunate scenes that, kind of let the film down. And, I have to agree with them on some of that. And I also agree with the point they made about not being able to follow the film. This is not necessarily a story that just flows off the tongue. But I think that if, you can kind of say to yourself, okay, these families are at war, and they're fighting over this spice, you should be able to handle it.
Well, it's kind of, I haven't read the books. Okay, I've seen the new movie and the old movie, but even though I've done that, I still find parts of the story confusing because there's just things I don't know, things that aren't fleshed out. But I'm fine with that because when I watch movies, sometimes it's fun to be in that position where you don't have every single answer, because I want to go away from a movie having questions, wanting to know more. Maybe I want to see it again. Some other points I want to catch. And I think it's an exaggeration when they say that no one who hasn't read the books can follow this movie. And also the way they describe it, I think a lot of reviewers at that time just kind of got on a bandwagon because this movie was kind of sailing up, trying to be like one of those really big successes, and it was complicated. It was different. David Lynch wasn't a big director. It has some scenes that are very strange. One of the scenes I remember very much from this movie is one of the Harkonnens having a drink, which is a small kind of creature in a little glass, and he presses it in the glass and drinks the liquid, kind of like a freshly pressed like orange juice. Oh, this is just some poor bird creature, and those are very. I don't know if that's in the book by any means, but to me it's a very Lynchian way of telling a story. He as well as David Cronenberg really likes to do plays with the organic, with body tampering, kind of challenging the audience to see things that aren't particularly nice or common. And that's one of the things I think this movie really does well, is that it does a lot of those things to create something that is truly different from the way the characters look, to maybe some of the effects they used. Is there anything in the movie that really stands out for you as unique?
Yes, and I agree with you in regards to how on earth was he going to portray what might be considered the controversial lifestyle that the Harkonnen people have on Giedi Prime. And this is perhaps something that was difficult to convey, you know, and I think that it would sort of, you know, this was why the film is a masterpiece in a way, because those parts are difficult to watch and they're meant to be disturbing. And of course, it's an individual's choice to say that they enjoyed those parts. That was their favorite part of the film. But I think that what makes it stand out is just how easily it flows into that scene. And, you know, you see just looking at, and this is the thing that I think is also very interesting, is that, and I mentioned this before, remember, you know, these individuals are a lot older than they look. And so, you know, their consciousness is different. And, you know, what they desire to do with their lives is completely different. You know, where we're seeing it later on in the scene, we see that one of the characters is sort of forced to have this new lifestyle now. And that new lifestyle, which, you know, seems so incredibly undesirable, I think, for a lot of people, something that you wouldn't want to do. If somebody said that you had to eat, you know, eat something that you didn't want to consume, or practice a religious practice that you didn't want to, or, you know, decide to change your lifestyle so dramatically every single day. And if you don't, you'll die. This is the type of stuff that seems unfathomable to a lot of us, but it's the reality in this type of galaxy that they're living in now. And the familiarity of the differences is like second nature to all of them, because they're accustomed to having the Spacing Guild, you know, bring them to another area in a day without aging. But for us, the notion of having to do something like that, and meaning that your entire life has changed around, it feels like a horror, feels like something that would mean your life was ending and not a new beginning to your life. And so, you know, even the notion of when he shows House Atreides leaving Caladan, and you had mentioned how great it, you know, like you could see Caladan was sort of like a planet that had an ocean on it. And I know there's some controversy in regards to the ending of the David Lynch film, but you know, starting off with a planet that seems like it has, you know, similar to, let's say, Earth's environment, where a good portion of it may be covered with water or some sort of liquid substance. And then you're going to a place that's the complete opposite. And then the notion of them talking and saying that they know that they're walking into a trap is just astounding, because, you know, I think there would be resistance to this. And so, you know, I think that conveying that, or telling somebody, you know, you're going into a trap, you know, most people say, I'm not going to do that, but it goes ahead because in their level of consciousness, perhaps it's a trap now, but maybe in 200 years it won't be. You know, just trying to get it, wrap the entire existential experience of it is very difficult. And we see during the time travel sequences when the Spacing Guild kind of shoot out these beams and then these rings that kind of are trying to make you seem like you're on some sort of, an acid trip is not what this is. This thing is like even far more beyond that. And how do you convey that on film? How do you even understand, why is this, you know, what is the water of life? Like, there's so many things in it that are so special and unique. These Bene Gesserit women drink this substance and it transforms them to a place where they're terrified. Like, it's such a unique and fulfilling film that if you just can't be bored in this film. There's nothing boring in this film. It's a party. It's a party. It is. And so, you know, there's just so many things in it that are, you know, even now, you know, so many years later, it's still mind-blowing. Just even the thought of, you know, these families coming together. And even in the end, Paul Atreides had to kind of make a union. House Atreides had to make a union with the Padishah group. Like he had to. Like this was something that had to happen. And I didn't see that coming. I guess I should have seen it coming because, you know, obviously it's important to these ruling clans. It's so much more complicated than it appears. And the attempt of making it, you mentioned the costume design, the colors, the worlds looked wonderful. I also think that we also saw, like within this film, that we had the omniscient point of view in a way. So we heard many groups of people say, "Oh, maybe he's the one." You know, like this is what they were thinking in their mind. But sometimes, even if you do hear the omniscient point of view, it doesn't tell you the full story. So, so that was very interesting too, because you know, there's a part where Paul is kind of listening, and he's kind of in his room, and he's not talking because he can't, because he'll get killed by this you know, thing that's supposed to kill him. Yeah, and then it's like, and sometimes those scenes don't translate well, but then they give you the point of view of the weapon, and the weapon is kind of like looking at his eye, and you know, like it just must have taken so much time and energy to create and execute all of these scenes. Like every scene must have taken a week to create.
Yeah, or more. And I was really surprised actually when seeing these two, the new and the old movie, back to back, because there are very many scenes that are very similar. And also some scenes have the exact same dialogue. And of course, that just means that those are probably the scenes that are most faithful to the book. But I have to mention a couple of things in comparing the two movies that differ them. In the original, I love how they made these personal shields that they use.
Yes.
The old tech of rotoscoping those, and we both hang out over at the Burnettwork, and I saw Robert Meyer Burnett's friend Dieter Bastian say on the last Let's Get Physical Media over there, he spoke about the fact that he so much preferred the version of the personal shields from the old one contra the new one, and that was fun for me to hear, because I sat with the exact same impression. In the new one, it's very sleek. It's kind of like the skin softly vibrates. There's just like a small aura around them. But in the original movie, you have this rotoscoping technology where they just make these giant boxes around people. And I found a clip of someone who did this thing where you kind of remake scenes and you Swede them. You make them with like basically a $0 budget. And I have a clip of the fight scene that we're going to watch now.
All right.
Shield practice.
Bloop, bloop, bloop. Bloop, bloop, bloop.
I've got you, Gurney. Look down.
I think they really just hit it on the nose there of how something can seem so dated today, but still it gets noticed. If you like, parodying something is probably in many cases the best form of flattery, and the scene where Gurney and Paul is fighting with those personal shields is something I knew of even before seeing this movie, because that's one of those clips that probably always get used to try to like say something about this movie. Mm-hmm. And it's an amazing way of kind of making a world of their own, which they have done with this movie. And
well, I'm so glad you showed that scene because that's one of those things that is the director's interpretation or the screenwriter's interpretation of what these shields are going to look like and how they're going to be represented. And, and once again, it's like this greater level of consciousness. Imagine having a shield completely surround you, that produces that level of protection. It just seems unfathomable, but it's a reality in their world. And they're relying on these shields. Like, they need them when they're in combat situations. And we see, Paul doesn't feel like fighting, there's, and I always say he's sort of like the reluctant prince / emperor, future emperor. He's like, I don't really feel like fighting. And Patrick Stewart makes some snide remark about, the way you feel sentiment is for love making and some other thing. And, but not for fighting. Like you need to defend yourself when you have to. And I think that was something else that came through in the film, is that, Paul has been trained for a very long time, and he's had the best of everything. And now he's it's not that he doesn't have the best of everything anymore. He doesn't have that same level of comfort, or at least it appears he doesn't have that same level of comfort. And you've seen the next film, maybe I'm wrong, maybe maybe where he's staying after he leaves, the former Harkonnen, newly House Atreides, but then he flees away from that compound to go where the Fremen are. Maybe the new version of the Fremen location is different from what we've seen in the old one, but what I can say, it certainly isn't the same level. And they're not focusing. I think the reason why, perhaps in the story, it looks different, not just in the movie, but maybe in the story too, is because the Fremen have a different focus. They're just in another realm of consciousness that everybody else is. It's sort of like you're looking at them and you're trying to understand them, and it's like you're going by your own standards, and you can't do that. You cannot understand these people just by sort of looking at them and trying to figure them out. That's not going to work. No. They have a much deeper, more involved culture. And I think that perhaps the Lynch movie doesn't do that. But what it does do is that, you certainly know they're different from Paul and his mother. Now, what makes Paul and his mother kind of get accepted into them, and I did want to talk about this because this is something else that's very unique about the film, is the voice, right? Like, how does the voice come through? And of course I love the voice, and I happen to have seen a little bit of it because I saw the first 10 minutes of the new film in a preview, and this was something up for interpretation, Terje, and I do want to get your opinion about it, because I grew up knowing the voice from David Lynch's film, and it's something that had to be played in a movie theater, right? In order to get the real feeling of the voice or an understanding of the director, or, as you're reading it, what is your interpretation of it for a group of people who have reached a completely different level of consciousness and now have complete control over someone using the voice? And so I've always known the voice from David Lynch's point of view. And I can't say for certain, it didn't seem too different. There's this one scene where, Paul is at the dinner or breakfast table with his mother, and she says, use the voice. She's very casual about it, unemotional about it. And
yes, in the new movie, the take on it is much more subtle. It's kind of almost, I think I'd compare it more like to a Jedi mind trick, maybe, where you kind of like you suggest something for someone with a certain intensity, but like in the Lynch movie, it's almost kind of like you're like mind raping someone to do something, because it's very brutal, it's very unpolished, and of course towards the end of the movie it gets weaponized. So it'll be interesting to see how they deal with the voice in the hopefully coming part 2 of Denis Villeneuve's Dune. But I think I think it must be a kind of a new stage of evolution where you kind of come into contact with this, like the fourth space, or what you'd call it, where you're just able to kind of control someone by pulling their strings. they don't have a choice in what they're doing. They're just inferior to your suggestions. But
yes,
the greater meaning of it, I don't know. The movie. It's been so much to take in. I haven't really had the chance to kind of delve on the meaning of things, because there's a lot of things to kind of take in from this story.
And it's yes, there certainly are. There is a lot, and what one interesting part is that when Paul and his mother Jessica flee, and go to where the Fremen are, or luckily, find the Fremen, and they happen to have the manual that shows them how to build what they call the wielding devices, and that's supposed to help. If you're learning how to do it, this device will show you how to use it. But Paul himself, at the end of David Lynch's film, is able to use the voice without the wielding module anymore. And so, I think that's also very interesting. And he kind of they kind of tried to show you, well, how powerful is he? He could split an entire castle into, like in that last scene where he kind of gets angry after, fighting Fate. And I have to say, I love that they still had like the Harkonnen, like he's there, he's actually the underdog at that point, because, like half of their armies, I think, were destroyed in fights, and they've been keeping it very hush hush. And, they're like in a bad position. The Baron has just been flown out into a worm, and Fade is still badass. He's like, bring it. And those Harkonnens, like, that's why they were the ones who were on that planet, I think, because they showed no mercy and they never give up. And I think that's like they're an incredible group of humanoid creatures. They're unusual, but they certainly are like, they would never, give up in a fight ever.
Speaking of Sting's character Fade, I saw an interview that said that up until the night before the scene where he comes out of this regeneration chamber, he was supposed to be naked. And yeah, I know. I feel so sorry for everyone who wanted to see his Sting. But it didn't happen. So the costume department made this little winged pair of underpants in just like a few hours for him to use. We have been talking about this movie for almost 50 minutes, and I see there's a lot of comments. So I think maybe we should jump in to see what they're saying. And after the comments, we can give our final thoughts, and then I'm gonna play the teaser of what movie I'm going to discuss next week.
Okay.
So yes, Jovalar, my friend in Norway, says hello there, and hello there to you and your lovely long hair.
Thank you.
Todd Michael Janisevsky, our in-house Dune book expert, says he almost said alien. There are no aliens in Dune. Everything, single thing, is the result of human evolution once Earth is abandoned. Yes, I know. But science fiction things are often about aliens, so I had a little alien slip of the tongue. Tal Michael follows up with, humans out there have never once encountered anything non-human related. There's an odd moment in God Emperor of Dune that something is implied, but it is somewhat implied it was Leto II.
Thank you.
Doing the thing. The entire Imperium runs on a delicate tripod structure of Emperor Guild and Landsraad, great and minor houses. The Spacing Guild keeps it all together, but they will not intervene directly.
Right.
They have a what's it called in Star Trek? The prime objective. Todd Michael says, I'm Dune babbling. I'm pretty sure Matt hates when that happens. Well, I love it when it happens, so it's
I'm fine with it.
Hey there, Tom. Good to see you in the chat. Tom Jr. Jackson says, hello all. Good to see you, Terje. And hello to Rrr Mmmm.
Hi.
Super sticker. Tal Michael says they've been waiting for the savior because the Ben Gesserit have seeded this prophecy
Right.
throughout many human cultures. It
Right.
is called the mission protectiva. It is done to ensure a reverend mother can find protection if needed. They essentially engineer religions, and Jessica uses this to her advantage.
Yes.
That's interesting. Engineering religion.
Yes.
Kind of weaponizing religion, actually.
Well, in a sense, it's used also for control. So, by planting the seed of this prophecy, over several generations, over several hundred generations, it becomes, something that's so entrenched in their culture that their culture cannot exist without it.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's a whole discussion there about religion, which I'm not going to touch with a 6 feet long cattle prod. I think it's an interesting subject, religion, both in real life and in movies. The good thing about movies is that you can discuss things that are relevant to our human lives without really offending people, because you can kind of tweak it and make it into something else. That's a good thing about movies.
Exactly.
Tal Michael says the telepathy Mohiam shows is a Lynch made up thing. It is not a Bene Gesserit trait outside of themselves. It was a story device to allow that scene to take place.
Yeah, and so as I said, in a lot of these scenes, sometimes in films they'll give you an omniscient point of view, or they'll show you something, but they almost have to put that in there, or else you're not going to know what's going on. And God bless you if you've been paying attention to every single detail in that. But he had to add some things in order to make it seem cohesive, because even in its current state, some people would say that it's not as cohesive as it could be.
Yeah, well, there's some things I could say there about the new one, but I won't spoil it. Tal Michael says the Ben Gesserit possesses a training in observing the minutiae of behaviors. They read body language and nuance in language, and it appears they are telepathic due to their logic and analysis.
And we saw that with Jessica in the beginning when she's looking at the doctor, and she kind of questions him, and I can't remember. Actually, she wasn't the only one to ask the doctor if he was okay. His behavior seemed off, and she noticed that when he said the word Harkonnen, to her, she sensed a nuance of hatred towards the Harkonnens. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't have any love for the Harkonnens either, but maybe he just really, deep down had this resentment, and there was no reason for it. And she's like,
and then he kind of closes up, and he doesn't want to speak about it. And you see her conversation with him from kind of her perspective, but what the movie does, it tells us that there's something about him that you can't trust. Which it's a very typical movie ploy, but it worked very well, I think, in the movie. Todd Michael is Dune babbling again. Sorry, no, that's why you're here.
It's all good. That's why we're here.
That's what we're paying you for. We're paying you in pennies and sand. Tom Jr. Jackson says, I know that Lynch's Dune is streaming on HBO Max. Should I see it first, or should I wait and see the new one first? That's a very good question, Tom. And go ahead and you can answer it, and I can see if I agree or not.
Absolutely, go and see David Lynch's Dune first. I think it's a good primer for what you might want to expect. And of course, as I've said before, it's a hard act to follow. But I've seen the first 10 minutes of the next film, and we're supposed to be getting an additional film after that one. So I think that it's interesting to look at, but it's also interesting to note that there are some things in the film that aren't accurate, and just take what you can and enjoy it for what it is. It's a 1984, version of a classic series of books that just have intrigued, millions of people. You won't be disappointed in watching it. Go see it.
I agree. I kind of I got kind of convinced that I should go blind into seeing the new Dune. And if I could go back and do it again, I would have liked to have seen Lynch's movie first.
Oh.
Firstly, it's because it's older, but the main thing is it tells the story further than the new movie. So if I had seen Lynch's version first, I think I might have felt more fulfilled when Denis Villeneuve's movie ended, because I would have had at least an inkling of knowing what's going to happen next. Because the new movie, let's compare the new Dune movie to like the first part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It kind of fails at being a movie on its own. The Fellowship of the Ring, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Denis Villeneuve's movie, it has a beginning and a middle. So when the movie ends, it really just ends. And having to wait for that second movie that we're not even sure is coming is a tough sell. And I think that's going to be one of the things that this movie is going to, for many people, fail at. The Fantasmagorium show says, if you're new to Dune, I would watch the new film first. Okay, I'm sorry, the Fantasmagorium show. I'm speaking against myself, but it's okay. Tal Michael says, the disgusting look of the Baron in this version is pure Lynch, while an extremely overweight man requiring the suspensors, the deceased flesh and all of that is made up. Yes, I have also heard that was a Lynchian trait. And that even though he was big and couldn't really stand on his own, they made him even more hideous. But that's the kind of stuff I like to see, stuff that's out there. So it's all good. Slice Night says, afternoon to you, Slice Night. Tal Michael says, the Lynch ending is also a total made-up thing. Believe me, without spoiling it, that ending cannot happen in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
The Fantasmagorium show says to Tal Michael, I agree. I never liked the Lynch ending. I don't know how the story is supposed to end, but me as well, I don't really feel the ending in that movie to be fulfilling at all. Slice Night says, I saw the movie once over 20 years ago, and I barely remember it. Well, there are very few movies I saw 20 years ago and haven't rewatched that I remember at all. Tal Michael says to the Fantasmagorium show, it literally makes zero sense given the nature of Arrakis and the spice. Slice Night says, I just remember not liking it. Too much plot to cram into one film. And yes, you are right. You are absolutely right. I like the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries, though, for a TV show, that is. Yeah, I'm going to have to check that out. It probably has abysmal special effects since it's from like the early 2000s, but the main thing is the story and how it's portrayed. Tal Michael says, my one major fear in the new film is that they are going to change Chani's parentage without thinking of the impact it will have on elements of Children of Dune. I don't know the Children of Dune, so I don't know. Slice Night says, but I haven't seen that in 20 years either, so this movie and story will be very fresh for me. But yes, even though that's true, you still have it behind here in your mind somewhere, so it'll help. The Fantasmagorian says to Slice Night, I liked both of the miniseries as well, so much so I own the DVDs of both. Yes, I'm going to get the Blu-rays from Amazon. They were actually quite cheap. Tal Michael says to Slice Night, it's an interesting way to do it on a budget. I'm sure it is. Tom Jr. Jackson says, I've never read the books or seen the film, so we'll be going into this blind.
Oh my gosh.
Not completely, though, because you're going to go and watch Lynch's movie.
Yeah.
Grab some snacks and go watch it. Tal Michael says, I like how it feels almost like a stage play. Yes, I totally agree. The costumes, the sets, they're very, very much so. It could have been a stage play, which Slice Night also says to Tal Michael. Tal Michael says, OMG! I did the cardboard thing stoned once back in the 90s. Oh, Great. I would have loved to have seen that. Slice Knight laughs hilariously, of course. I agree. Yes, Todd Michael says about the Gurney quote you started. Please don't bring up weirding modules. Oh. I have to say one other thing I have to say that I found hilarious with Patrick Stewart's character is the scene in the desert where he marches into war carrying a pug. That moment was totally like, what the hell is going on? Why are you taking this poor pug into war? Tom Jr. Jackson asks, do I dare ask what that means? And let's see if he gets an answer. Yes, pray tell. Tal Michael says, voice is not really a thing later, not like it is early in the first novel. A change made by Lynch because he did not space kung fu on sand. Okay. The weirding way is what the Freeman call the style of fighting the Ben Gesserit can do because they have such fine control of their muscles and bodies. That doesn't really come through at all in the movie. No,
it's too
and
Todd
complicated
to bring it forward in the film. So that was something he just couldn't do there.
This next line is something you have to read, I think.
Fade, lovely fade.
Excellent. Tom Michael says, I think when he says there are a lot of comments, he'll be upset. It is me just mostly babbling. No, it's fine. Stop it.
Oh, Tom, thank you, Tom.
Says, great show, Terje. Thanks. I try. Jovelar says, saw the 4K version of the movie, but I wish they cut the resolution and the HDR effect when showing Baron's face and blisters. Ugh. Yeah, they do really come through there. Tal Michael says to me, we'll talk about the ending in person. You'll understand once I explain it to you. Oh, in person? Yes. Are you coming over to my house?
Apparently, that ending was, I guess, maybe thrown in, but it's not the actual story. It's not supposed to happen. So it's kind of strange.
Hi, Cinema Gulp.
Hi, Ben.
Great show, Slice Knight says.
Thank you.
I had a good time. It's always fun having a good discussion about a culty movie.
Yes.
So we've ran through the comments so far. Do you have any closing thoughts on this movie that you want to share with us and our audience?
Yes, I do have closing thoughts. I think this film's a masterpiece. And, I don't think I couldn't have, I just am astounded how he was able to put it all together. And while it does have its deficiencies, overall, I feel like I'm in that entire galaxy. The only other thing I was going to say is that the sister, Paul Atreides' sister, I found her incredibly disturbing.
Yes.
And that's okay. That's okay. Like, I don't hate it. It doesn't make me dislike the film at all. But I'm still disturbed by that poor little girl. And, sort of like what she was. It's not that I just kind of like, could she have a normal childhood? I guess she wasn't going to have a normal childhood, right? But it's okay. It's okay. I love the film. Go see it if you haven't.
Yes. Another comment from our friend Cinema Gulp. This movie was nuts. As a lifelong Lynch fan, I have to say I always wondered what Return of the Jedi would have looked like if he hadn't taken this on. Oh, yeah. In another world, we could dream of seeing David Lynch's Star Wars. It would probably be better than the stuff they've made the few last years. Okay, I'll not go into a fight with anyone, but it hasn't been really that great. Well, myself, closing thoughts on this movie and the other movie and the whole Dune universe. I am officially interested. I have seen the new movie. I've seen this one. I'm now going to seek out and see the miniseries, and I'm probably going to listen to the books. This is a huge thing. I understand the fact that this is huge. Like when I grew up, I know there were like real-time strategy PC games set in the Dune world. So like I said a while ago, I think it's strange that this whole universe has just evaded me. I don't know why I've been so afraid to dive into it, but it's never too late to turn around and get into it, and basically that's what I'm doing. I think it's a fascinating movie. I'm going to watch it many more times. I'm excited. I bought the Arrow 4K set that came out just a few weeks ago. And there are commentary tracks on there that I'm interested in listening to. And some place down the line, I'd like to maybe see a couple of the other cuts of the movie just to see how different they are. But I'll space it out a little. So I don't like watching the same movie many times during a very short space, because I kind of feel guilty because I have so many other things on my plate. But yes, I give this movie the rating of 2 big hands full of sand out of 3. So I want to thank all the people that came in the live comments. It's always fun to see people commenting, even when they're 90% of them is Todd Michael. That is also just something I like. You can never have too much Todd Michael, I've heard. And that's something I live by. His kielbasa brings all the boys to the yard. And thank you so much for coming to the show and discussing this movie with me, RM. And you are welcome back anytime. Just shoot me a message if there's a movie you would like to come on and discuss, and you have a space on this show whenever you want it.
Thank you, Terje. It was a pleasure being here.
Next week, there will be a new movie that we are going to talk about, and I like to reveal that by doing a little promo, and that's what we're going to be doing now. So for now, just stay cult, and I'll see you next week, peeps.